Okay, it's connecting. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, welcome everyone, officially now to the Foresight Daily Sanity Preservers. This is very much the first kind of round of experiments, and I'm super happy to have Jaan Tallinn join for this round. I think thank you so much for taking time for this. He was already on the guinea pig side of kind of like a Zoom conference on Friday. So thanks for sticking it out with us. And yeah, on Friday, basically, what we discovered is um, that there's a lot of different ways in which there's now an opportunity to action and to do something new. And I think, you know, for me, this kind of strikes home quite interestingly, because usually, like in the scheme of existential hope, which is kind of like this effort that I have to kind of like spearhead toward positive futures. Usually, I always like to use this quote whenever I try to tell people about like how great the futures could be, which is by Marshall Savage, and it's basically teetering here on the fulcrum of destiny stands our own bemused species. The future of the universe hinges on what we do next. If we take up the sacred fire and stride forth into space, the universe will be a burning. Because of us, the barren dusts of a million billion worlds will coil up into the pulsing magic forms of animate matter. A whole frozen universe will thaw and transmogrify, from howling desolation to blossoming paradise. Dust into life, the very alchemy of God. That's by Marshall Savage. And, you know, even during normal times, kind of the delta between where we currently are and where we could be is really big, right? And it seems like now, during a time of crisis, it seems like we're almost further away. But I actually want to make a case, and I think today we're making a case that that's upon us, right? It doesn't have to be so. You know, there's, I think, a few, like, I guess, really three choices that we can make right now, and that will actually catapult ourselves much further or much faster toward better futures. One is that we can, you know, really take time to kind of strip away the kind of like the irrelevancy of life and have like a little near-death experience and kind of focus again on what's actually important to us as individuals. Then I think the second thing is like stepping up as a community, showing much more resiliency. And I think we've already seen that, like incredible efforts really at kind of at, you know, open sourcing different respiratory models, at like kind of getting masks to California, getting masks to doctors. So people are really kind of growing community resiliency, also in kind of stepping up and, you know, just doing kind of check-in with each other, right, in a very like in a very personal way. And then thirdly, I think there's this possibility, and that's hopefully what we're going to get to today, of doing something bigger than that. Because, you know, as the kind of quote that initiated this salon says, that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. And in existential risk circles, it's really interesting because oftentimes we have that quote and we're kind of like, kind of saying, okay, let's come up with a plan that in a potential crisis, you know, could be implemented. But the crisis is always theoretical, and no one actually really kind of thinks of, okay, when is it going to happen? So it's always like more a thought experiment. But now is the time. So I think now we have to really think hard about what it is that we can set in place now for the long term. And the time window is short because attention spans are short. So it's likely that we may be moving on to something new if we don't seize the opportunity. So I'm very happy that we have Jaan Tallinn here, because he has been thinking really deeply about existential risk really since a very long time, and has been kind of quite essential at launching a few of the organizations that are now doing fantastic work in that space. Jaan has a physics background. He's quite a devoted consequentialist, and he, you know, apart from you know, being like a founding engineer of Skype, he has really like used his ability to really think from first principles, to connect people, you know, to fund organizations that are doing amazing work, to found organizations that are doing amazing work, and really kind of like created much of the ecosystem in which we currently think about risks like pandemics on a larger scale. A few organizations include the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, the Future of Life Institute, MetaMed, those are ones that he co-founded, and he donates to a variety of organizations in the space. And I think, why I'm super excited to have him here is that there are really a lot of very, very exciting projects out there right now that are trying to do immediate help for COVID. But what we're discussing today is actually something slightly different. And it is how do we leverage what we currently have as a crisis, to not waste a good crisis, and to really try to set systems in place so that we can come out of this stronger, or like more anti-fragile, if you want to call it in a buzzword. And so Jaan started a list of ideas, divided into a few different areas, into technology opportunities, policy interventions, international coordination, and others. And perhaps we can take one at a time. But first and foremost, I want to really welcome you, Jaan, to the salon. Thank you so much for taking time. Thank you so much to experiment with this.
Thank you.
With us. Welcome. All right. Okay. Let's see. So basically, what Jaan did is he kind of jotted down a few incredible ideas, and others have been contributing to it. And I think it would be really great if we could run through them. That list, what we can touch on today, is not exhaustive. I'm hoping that we can just barely scratch a few of them and then leave it up for a larger Q&A. But if we perhaps want to start with the tech aspect of it, I think in terms of technology, you mentioned a few really good tools, and it's not that they haven't been around for a while, but now they may actually be a really good time to push for them. One of them is prediction markets, right? And perhaps you could say a few words for a few people that may not know what those are, and why is especially now a really good time to be thinking about prediction markets, or to be funding them.
So I think like on a sort of meta level, or a higher level, strategical level, I think it's important to sort of go with the flow right now, like rather than kind of trying to kind of sneak in some kind of agenda into the lives of people who are already kind of overwhelmed with the situation. For example, I don't know, people at kind of in various kind of crisis committees, etc. That said, it's kind of important to, I think, kind of, okay. So there are the interventions that we could be doing. They have like different time sensitivity. So I do think that the golden age for trying to make the civilization more resilient, or golden time window, will be actually passed like immediately after the crisis is over, because like then this thing is still on everyone's mind, but people will hopefully no longer be kind of like fighting the fire, right? However, it's still plausible that there are things that can be done like while the fire is still like roaring, and one of the things indeed seems to be that there's like increased hunger for reducing uncertainty, and I think that kind of hunger can be fed in a way that generalizes to other potentially kind of species-wide problems. And one particular kind of thing in this idea, okay, so like if you look at this categorization, like things that are like fairly urgent or can be done fairly urgently, within that, like things that address actual current needs. And within that, we have this particular idea of prediction markets. So one thing that I've been now doing is kind of working with a site called metaculus.com, who has kind of special kind of subsite now, pandemic.metaculus.com, to kind of specifically address the kind of try to make predictions about questions that are kind of relevant for this particular crisis. Yeah, so initial really kind of concrete idea to do is to just try to make this thing better and try to promote it as something that people naturally would be kind of find useful.
Okay, sweet. I think I'm going to share a link to that maybe after this with a specific Metaculus link, so that people can actually sign up and make some predictions. I think we currently have, let's see, we currently have 80 people on this call. So if everyone here went to Metaculus straight afterwards and started predicting a little bit, that would already, I think, be quite beneficial. All right. So I think that's really one point. And I think then one of the kind of stretch goals that you mentioned was, creating something a little bit more sophisticated, like something like a world modeling tool. And I think that, yeah, if you want to elaborate in a few words on like what their plan would entail.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why kind of prediction markets kind of come to mind is that they are sort of like fairly low-hanging fruit. They already exist, but aren't like kind of super popular. So like just trying to make them popular in a moment where things are kind of seem to be when there seems to be market demand is a very natural thing to do. But sort of a generalization of that, prediction markets is only one way to try to reduce the uncertainty about the future. Generalization of that is just kind of increased world modeling capabilities in general, and that might include kind of things like kind of specific institutes who are just trying to do research and trying to kind of make predictions. So one way of thinking about it is that there's a lot of like effort by really smart people that goes into just trying to predict the kind of the next move of the stock market or kind of liquid markets in general. Like, is there a way using mechanism design or some kind of marketing or whatnot, like just tap into some of like a fraction of this brain power and try to make it try to direct it towards something that is kind of more general?
Well, especially since all that brain power, or most of that brain power that's trying to go into predict the stock market, arguably doesn't do any better than throwing darts, unless they're cheating and outrunning their clients, or just using higher speed computers to get orders in ahead of other people. So, I mean, I wouldn't point to the stock market predictions as some great evidence that prediction markets work.
Yeah, I think I would disagree. That I think that the reason why it's very hard to kind of make money on stock market, it is because there is a competition of like survival of the fittest, and like if they really, I mean, there's a reason exactly why it's kind of like
it depends. It depends a little bit what you're actually trying to predict. So I think the research shows that if you're trying to predict stock performance going up, it's about a 50-50 chance at best. So you're tossing a coin. But on the other hand, if you look at brokerage reports that are predicting stocks going down, in other words, sell orders, they actually do better than 50-50, right? So I think it kind of depends what you're trying to predict. Predicting failure is kind of easier to predict than predicting success.
Okay.
Yeah, as a trader,
yeah, I mean,
that doesn't make any sense to me as a trader. Whatever you can predict with greater than 50% success, you can make money on. And there's derivatives that move in all sorts of ways comparing to the underlying. So I think I'm dubious about that, but this is a tangent, so I'll shut up.
Like one thing like that's kind of related to that is that Metaculus doesn't run on, so you can't actually have a financial gain by betting, right?
I mean, they right now just introduced like a prize, which are right now smaller. Hopefully they were going to make them a little bit bigger. But yeah, that there are kind of non-trivial issues when you're actually going to bring in money into prediction, or otherwise try to kind of incentivize predictions, because sometimes you might get sort of self-fulfilling prophecies where people basically predict that something unlikely will happen, and then they will make it happen, which is something that we definitely don't want.
Yeah. That's definitely like incentive markets rather than, and that's what people, I guess, are worried about with assassination markets as well. But
yeah,
I have a question.
A typical example.
Maybe I'm not up to speed on this, but I was under the impression that it's not actually legal to bet money on prediction markets, right? And that's why I thought that the only way to do that is via augur or gnosis, or like via some kind of like blockchain based
or in different jurisdictions than US, right?
Right now. That's true. Yeah.
Prediction markets are legal in Britain, for example.
Oh, okay, interesting. Do you have a good example there, or?
Because you're the one who does it.
Like, because when I looked at augur, like when I looked at augur,
so you're not gonna do
it. Could you please mute yourself?
Nobody said you are.
Suna, could you please mute yourself?
I think the admin can
Hello?
also.
Okay. Yeah. I'll try. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna mute folks here. But so I was thinking that. Oops. I was thinking that when I visited augur and gnosis, actually, and that was still when it was like a beta version, the kind of questions that were asked there were more sports bets and like things that weren't actually really relevant. And so I think the really great thing about Metaculus is that people are talking about the topics that matter. And I think one thing that we discussed a little bit at the AI meeting was one thing that could be used instead of financial gains to incentivize people to bet is reputation building, perhaps, right? And then we talked a little bit there about different pseudonyms, and because sometimes you may not want to be you may not want to appear or like have your prediction attached to your name, but you still want to be able to build up a reputation, and you could build up a reputation even for a pseudonym. Do you have a few kind of ideas of how that may work?
I'm not sure what's difficult about that. It's just create a pseudonym and build reputation. Like there's this kind of more general observation that what we call identities are just like a collection of predicates that are like binary predicates. Are we part of certain community or not? For example, like I'm part of people born in the 70s, right? So that is like from one hand, you can look at like this my identity and this is my birth year, but like you can actually break down my identity and everyone's identity in a way that it includes like the group, belonging to a group that have been born in the year that you have been born, and that's a kind of general principle. So like there is nothing. In some ways, it's even more natural way of looking at identity that it's just a sort of set of pseudonyms, basically, a set of predicates.
Yeah, that's true. I think a few things that were discussed as worrying potentially was, can you actually have a pseudonym that cannot be traced back to you, or how can pseudonyms kind of like relate to kind of like to real world action?
Yeah, this is difficult. Yeah, like whenever there is like whenever you are having like real world effects that are tied to some pseudonym or identity or private key, like usually those effects have some side effects that can be used to kind of trace things back to you. I mean, that's like an infosec challenge.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. I think it's easier. It's easier to be sort of anonymous or pseudonymous in virtual space than it is in real life. Especially now that we have like face recognition in principle, being able to kind of de-anonymize everyone.
Yeah, but that's another perhaps advantage of wearing masks is that the face recognition may not get you very fast.
Yeah, indeed, and we already see like in Hong Kong that there was a kind of like this actually came up that like it's a sort of problem that people are wearing masks in order to kind of stay anonymous. And interestingly, another observation that I made was that if you search, like Russia has kind of fought like 2 wars in the last 20 years at least. One, and if you go on Google and search for like Chechen war in I think it was in 90s, and then you search for, actually now 3 wars come to mind. Like the second one I mentioned was second one I meant was that the Russian and Georgian war, and I think there's like a decade between them, or a little bit more. Like, and you look at the Google images, like there's like one very stark difference between those shots from those wars. Like in the latter war, in Georgian war, the soldiers are wearing masks because, well, they all have Facebook accounts, right? Or like what's the Russian version of it? I'm gonna forget. So it's like yeah, they want to be anonymous.
All right. Well, so maybe there's some kind of like yeah, behavior change that's coming from that. I think, and this is only, I mean, we only really scratched the surface. I think, you know, in your initial kind of like idea outburst, you had like, you know, like tech interventions, but then also you went on to policy interventions. And one of the policy interventions was funding many of the kind of tech interventions that we need. And I think like another kind of like Milton Friedman quote that I like is, like, we do not influence the course of events by persuading people that we are right when we make what they regard as radical proposals, but rather we exert influence by keeping options available when something has to be done at a time of crisis. So it is this kind of like Pareto-topian notion, I think a little bit of Eric Drexler, of like making the things that are good rational in the eyes of the people that have to make the decision. And so I was wondering, you know, are there a few ways in which you can foresee that kind of like policy interventions or that policymakers could be kind of like could be bought into funding a lot of the kind of like good tech proposals that are out there right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I have like a good answer there, other than, yeah, as you mentioned, just kind of trying to build useful things that that kind of get adoption, kind of sort of can stand on their own, rather than whose use needs to be kind of legislated.
Yeah, I think like one thing that you mentioned in the doc is, you know, growing like a better ecosystem between one scientist and people on the ground, but also between scientists and actually people in the government.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I mean, when was the Brexit vote? In 2017, I want to say, or was it 16? I forget. And I was on a panel and was talking about the AI safety. And because like Brexit was on everyone's mind, I got this question like, how's going to Brexit influence AI safety? And back then, was like, first of all, thought was like, well, I don't see like how there's any influence on that. And now, like after like a few minutes thinking about it, I was like, wait a minute, like one thing that Brexit will do is take the potentially the most informed government about AI safety and existential risk in general, because like 2 major centers in the world, Oxford and Cambridge, happen to be in UK, and they have like way bigger influence over London, over the government, than Berkeley has. And Berkeley is like another like 3rd or 4th center in the world where kind of AI safety research happens. So like in some ways I thought that all Brexit is going to be bad for this, because like you take this like potentially the most informed government and then you're going to isolate it. Now, interesting thing that happened was that now it seems to be that yeah, people in British government are actually kind of interested in this topic in a way that the previous government was not. So it's like I think there's like weird dissonance in the community that somebody who's like or kind of the political side, who is kind of supposed to be on the other side from many, but obviously not all people in the community or from their political standpoint, suddenly is the most competent kind of government
Well,
on the planet, the
I
most
think you have something
interested.
similar. You have something similar in the US right now, right? With you know, UBI being discussed by Trump and co, and with like a few like prisoners being released in New York. And I remember when Iran released prisoners, and that was like a few weeks ago as a response to COVID. And you know, I was thinking that's a really good move, but this is impossible in the US. It's just never going to happen. And then here we are, you know, just really a few weeks later, and it has just like gradually happened. So I think the kind of updates that you're making and kind of like the kind of curveballs is almost like the opposite of a black swan, like kind of like and I think that's initially what and like what Owen and Toby Ott meant with existential hope, those kind of like events, not really unpredictable, but like that kind of like upscale the potential like expected benefit of the universe by a lot, but that may be unforeseen. You know, so I think maybe we can even expect some like positive events of this.
Yeah, I think there are kind of like two things that we should keep separate. Like one is that like humans are kind of political animals, and they tend to kind of like over amplify the differences of different political camps to their own detriment, basically. So it's, I think there are reasonable people. Like once you have like sufficient number of people, like some of them are bound to be reasonable, right? And they're like in kind of like big political movements, it's kind of very weird. It would be really weird if there weren't reasonable people. Once the movement is like sufficiently big or party is sufficiently big. And the other thing is just like the crisis thing. More than once I've heard that like the AI risk would become like much more understandable if we basically heard about alien ships that are on the way and will be here in like 20 years. Like that should, at least intuitively, be like much kind of uniting for humanity. And I think that is a second effect. Like now that we have the kind of species-wide crisis, I think it has like unifying effect, and we should kind of like milk it for the entire effect.
One angle that might be possible to press upon in that regard is that a virus is also, it's very simply describable as an optimizer. So we might use that as a marketing strategy to milk it.
Yeah, I mean, like that. I have like some technical questions that, like, I would kind of describe the kind of the ecosystem of like the species of virus as an optimizer, perhaps, because there's actually selective pressure, not that necessarily the individual things, although in some sense they are.
Right.
But yeah, like they are agenty things. So it's although like barely so. And yeah, it's totally possible that like the sort of end of the world will kind of look silly in a way that that like there is like this really dumb system that is just like kind of suddenly taking over in a way that we just can't stop. So, over Christmas, I read a draft of a great paper that's coming out by my friend Andrew Critch and his collaborators. It basically tries to kind of tries to define like a bare bones AI risk. So what are the kind of the minimum requirements for a potentially dangerous AI? And they call it prepotent AI. And there are two requirements. One requirement is that it's an AI or like a collection of AIs that have at least as big impact on the environment that humans have had. And the second is that it's AI or a collection of AIs that humanity no longer can stop, either because it's too smart for that or because of systemic reasons. Like it's not clear, for example, can we stop internet? Or if it's like some distributed thing like this virus, it's not obvious how we stop this virus, right? So like if there's only two things, then it means that we have unstoppable effect on the environment that is potentially much greater than humanity's. effect. And then like there's the entire research agenda that falls out of those two simple kind of assumptions.
Yeah, I think something that's at least tangentially related is what you also mentioned in the doc is gain of function. And, you know, perhaps you could say a little bit about, you know, how you think that perhaps the current crisis could be used to spark some public advocacy around that type of research, and why it's problematic, and, you know, what could be done about it.
Yeah, one thing that I already seen that is kind of being picked up as an idea, and I've also seen Andrew Critch advocating it, is that research papers should have a section about side effects. So the researchers who are kind of thinking about something original and publishing it, they should spend some time thinking about like what are the potential bad effects on the world from their research, and the idea there is to just like kind of have someone who is like hopefully a good person, like, or like a not like a deviant or anything, and the most familiar with the research that they're doing, because they are the ones doing it, actually kind of try to think through the scenarios, and if they really see that there is like a problem, hopefully they will not publish it. There will be some kind of self-censorship from publishing. And again, if gain of function is like a prime example, like the controversy. I think they were Dutch scientists a few years ago, where they kind of managed to use ferrets, I think, to make the really forget it, H1N1, I think was. I might be forgetting the exact. Basically, make it very infectious, infectious strain of this H1N1, and they published it. And then they were immediately kind of on defensive position, because like there was like a controversy, like is that something that, or actually that they didn't publish it initially, but like instead of there being like a norm in research community that you're kind of supposed to think about both good and bad effects of your research, there was like this external controversy that hopefully could be avoided in the future.
Yeah, and do you think that is something that scientists should be encouraged to think about, or is it something you know, where you need more cooperation? Because it does seem to me that back in the days, scientists had this perhaps like more I'd say like a more holistic understanding of how their research fits in, and kind of like the kind of adverse effects that may arise from it. But I think currently, like, you know, as we're making so much progress and ever faster, people are getting more and more specialized. So kind of like it's already so hard to keep up with the niche sector kind of that you're in, that I think sometimes, you know, this more holistic understanding of the technologies and how they may fit in kind of like falls on the wayside. So I was wondering whether you kind of like see that as a thing that you know, we should encourage scientists more to do, or whether it requires collaboration.
I mean, I think it's valuable to always look for like kind of doable interventions that have likely a positive impact. So I think this, like, promoting this norm of every research paper having a section about possible misuse or possible side effects, seems to be like one such thing. I'm not saying that, but it doesn't mean that it's sort of sufficient thing. Like we could do like much better by having, like, I don't know, prediction markets about or like some kind of like I don't know, decentralized oracles that you can ask, like, is that a good idea to publish this or not, or I don't know. But that, like these things sound like way more complex. Perhaps they're like yeah, easier and more doable things that would also push the world towards safer trajectories.
All right, and then one thing that I'm personally very excited about that you also mentioned is in terms of training. You mentioned, for example, that you know, one thing that kind of like policymakers could be encouraged to do is do more something like red teaming, or do something that is more like scenario planning. And that's something that I used to work in quite a lot. And you know, it's I think something of a crude version almost of the stretch goal that you mentioned, which is this world simulation kind of like idea. But basically what you do in scenario planning, you can do something like a steep analysis, you know, which allows you to separate out science, technology, economy, ecology, and politics. And then you can kind of like model out the different developments of each of those different sectors. And then you can take different developments and kind of like combine them with each other to see how they may influence each other. And the idea is here not that, you know, you get the perfect scenario, but the idea is that you do that for a lot of different, for taking a lot of different potential developments of each sector, and then kind of like creating resiliency strategies that are resilient across all of them. And that's usually done for one company in one industry in consulting, right? And only for 5 years, and that's already really hard. But potentially you could do something much larger than that, kind of like for civilization at large or something.
No, so military does it, I understand, at various militaries. A good friend of mine, Shahar Ravin at the Center for Study of Existential Risk in Cambridge, he has been for the last couple of years, has been kind of developing like a role-playing game, and has been like testing it at various conferences, etc. Where the goal is to basically play out strategic dilemmas as the kind of AI gets more and more advanced, and there's this like tension between kind of investing in safety in order to be kind of safe from doom, or investing in capabilities in order to kind of stay on top of the race, right? And then like he has been kind of I'm not sure if he has already written publicly about it, but like he has already kind of picked up a bunch of like insights into what kind of happens in that situation. Obviously, it's not clear how those how kind of indicative those results gleaned from that just like individual sort of games where people have kind of somewhat similar incentives to governments would actually play out when the players are the governments. But like, yeah, I think it's definitely valuable to work on this. And also I've been kind of encouraging him and his colleagues to kind of turn more and more of that scenario planning into a computer game, or like sort of computerize at least. So you would have kind of turn this fairly informal game into more like a modeling exercise over time, and then you can have like people that don't have to kind of be at the same room, for example. You can have the system to accumulate knowledge from how players have been playing to strategic situation in the last, and then you have like kind of simulated or like non-player characters that kind of try to represent the learnings of the earlier games, etc. And hopefully you would actually get something that then can be run on its own, and you can Monte Carlo the hell out of it and see like what kind of current policy decisions seem to be dangerous based on the learnings that we have learned from this scenario planning. But that, I mean, I can dream.
Well, actually, now is the time to be pushing for things like that. You know, it's again the type of thing that will probably be very successful now. And I went to one of his simulations at the Augmented Intelligence Summit put on by Anthony and Gaia. And I think Gaia may have even been on this call, but it was really fantastic. One thing I think that what was interesting that came out of it was that we always think, like, if you think about then this will happen, then an arms race will happen. Well, how, you know, or like if you actually try to model it out, and if you actually try to have like kind of like a role-playing game, like actually the steps that are involved for something are really hard. But it was also, I think, harder to do positive, kind of like a positive cooperative strategies, because if you're already set up in this adversarial kind of like scenario, then I think a lot of people ended up in let's say in gloomy scenarios. And I think that actually is a good piggyback to another thing that you mentioned, which is kind of like narrative shaping, right? And I think one thing that you said really succinctly is that, you know, there's like two ways the narrative could be panning out, kind of like globally after this. So perhaps, do you want to say a few words about the two ways that it could be and how we could shape it in a more cooperative narrative?
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't actually my, I mean, I have this document that many people have contributed to, but I think it,
it was like, in a nutshell, like, we can do this, and next time we can do it better.
So like it's, in this particular scenario, again, it wasn't a particular paragraph. The kind of person who wrote it said that like he or she sees the scenario where the narrative goes gives like human civilization like a confidence boost, right? That look, we managed to handle this crisis, and now we actually are smarter and wiser as a result, and we basically know how to. We've been kind of warned, etc. But then there's like the other alternative that quite often also happens, is that you just because there will be kind of tragic events. There already have been like many deaths, right? There will be just like kind of finger pointing and trying to kind of locally gain some prestige points in kind of like zero-sum game of mudslinging over what happened. Like, you should have done that, or you should have done that. So like one really important, from the kind of the existential risk perspective, trying to make the civilization more resilient towards future shocks, it's kind of really important to try to steer the narrative towards look, we are learning from here, and it's like sure, mistakes were made, but that's kind of expectable, and we should be trying to learn from that and make less mistakes and be more resilient in the future.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you mentioned, which kind of like resonates as well with the kind of like existential focus that I have, is, you know, this kind of like positive narrative shaping afterwards, like after the fact. And I think like I've been trying to do that somewhat with like, how can we kind of like entice the next generation to think more positively about the future? But here you mentioned it specifically about how can we retroactively kind of like have the narrative of COVID be a positive one and a learning one. And you mentioned, I think, a few examples of where that worked quite well in the past. And, you know, who do we need here? Who should we be seeking out to?
I mean, I think it's kind of important to be kind of empirical about this and see like what are the narratives that actually seem to be kind of spreading. What are the movies that kind of dominate people's thinking? I mean, in AI risk, it always has become Terminator, unfortunately. Although actually, like some people say that it's like, if you kind of look at Terminator, it's actually not a bad movie. Like it's not like entirely implausible, but like the problem, of course, is that the images.
I heard that there's now. I heard the second version, the Terminator, actually comes around and saves humanity. Wasn't there recently like a sequel to it?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, my Apple TV has been kind of pushing me to watch that for some reason. Yeah, but I'm not really an expert on how to kind of engineer memes or narratives. So at this stage, is for me like just like kind of trying to have my eyes open and see if there are things that kind of where things could be kind of pushed sideways, as I think Robin Hanson says it.
All right. I would encourage people, you know, in the interest of time, to raise their hands if you have a question, and maybe.
But in terms, but actually, let me add. But in terms of narrative, yes, like this is when it comes to kind of global catastrophic risks and existential risk, like this thing is like a almost as mild crisis as it could be, while still being like really shocking. So in some ways, if you kind of waste this thing and don't actually kind of build on this, it would be like just horrible waste.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like it's really important to kind of like try to use this to build kind of the unity of the entire species.
I mean, like one thing that was mentioned, at least on the doc, and I don't know whether it's from you or not, but was creating like a museum or like an institute, kind of like for crisis response that, you know, where you can like actively kind of like shape that narrative, like going forward, and where people can like come back to that.
Yeah, that's another, because we do have like many memorials like all over the world for like Second World War, and like many of the global institutions, like including UN most prominently, were built on the aftermath of World War II, and it's very possible that we're going to lose more people now in that what we did in World War II. Or I hope it's not. I mean, Metaculus doesn't think so, but it's still like not out of the question.
Yeah. Okay, I think while others want to raise their hand, perhaps, you know, I think we have so many people on this call. I mean, we're at like 80 people now, and I think, is there anything, you know, that you can immediately see this community where you know what they could be helping with, apart from like signing up to Metaculus, doing a bunch of predictions, but is there anything else that you see as kind of like that you'd like to kind of like close with, at least the official part of this conversation?
Yeah, I'm just like looking at the chat. There's like so many messages I can't. I will read them later.
Yeah, I love that people are so actively.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I don't think I have like any particular recipes at this stage, other than like kind of trying to. I mean, first of all, there is kind of value in kind of just forgetting about the meta level, even if you're kind of. Whoops! Did I lose the connection?
We can still hear you, but you're frozen.
Okay, and now I seem to be back. I think like at least other people started moving.
You're moving.
So like I do think that there's like really even value in just like kind of forgetting about the meta thing and forgetting about the generalization and just like working on this particular crisis, because like if you kind of care about the class of global disasters in general, like it's a very strong signal if we just like kind of just be helpful and try to kind of do the right thing within this particular one, now that we have a concrete one. So like, yeah, I've been kind of doing some of that myself, trying to kind of connect people who can kind of provide masks to Estonia, for example. But then, yeah, also while you're doing that, just like also keep in mind, like if there are things that could be useful either for the narrative or for even some technical capabilities that would generalize. Like, I mean, there are many apps that are being right now developed for kind of contact tracing, for example. Like other things that could be done, do they actually generalize into something that is kind of that would like counteract the vulnerable world, as Nick Bostrom puts it?
Yeah, I think one thing that you mentioned is, you know, keeping track of kind of like people that are being very helpful and cooperative versus others that you know, that are divisive, and actually trying to like kind of like signal boost those people, and you know, and kind of like add them to the column of people we want to work with, you know, for the long term.
I would classify this under this like milk the crisis for what it's worth when it comes to kind of make it as an example of like species actually cooperating. Let's make sure that we actually remember this thing as good as we can, and people who actually kind of were cooperative, they would not be forgotten.
Yeah. Hello? You still there?
I am, yeah.
Okay, good, good. I thought I'd lost you for a second. Good. The Wi-Fi connection is crazy with 75 people on a call. Okay, let's take a few questions. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much again from my end. I want to give it up, I think, to people that have raised their hand. I see Dekai, who's raised their hand, and then Brian Muhia. And would you say, just like in 10 seconds, who you are, where you're currently at, and then ask your question. Dekai, you go first.
Hi. So there's a massive echo, right? I'm in Hong Kong. I am an AI professor, and I alternate normally between Hong Kong and Berkeley, but I've been holed up in Hong Kong for the last several months for obvious reasons. I don't know if some of you might have been following the BOMA talks that are happening for like 24 hours right now, all about the coronavirus. And to the point about the narratives surrounding coronavirus and forming studying the memes and things like that. In fact, that was exactly the topic of the BOMA talk that I gave a few hours ago. We are actually building that. So anyone who is interested in that, Jaan or Alison or whatever, let's get in touch.
Sounds good. Perhaps you can put the link in the chat here.
And I think Dekai, we have you for a salon here later this week, which is on Thursday from 9 to 10 a.m. PT. So perhaps you can fill us more in on that. Thank you. Brian, who are you? Where are you from? Welcome.
Thank you. Hi everyone. So my name is Brian Muhia. I'm a machine learning engineer based in Nairobi, Kenya. I've been held up in the same way for a couple of weeks. I typically work remotely anyway, but right now it's just been hard to get out anyway. The quarantine has basically like locked everything down. So my question is, and like, yeah, so it's about the Jan's discussion of how to shape the narrative. And this question, it's basically about how when in the moment when we're trying to respond to a crisis, how do people get information, right? Because that's the starting point. So I'll give you an example from history. In 2007 in Kenya, there was this massive crisis where people were locked into a huge zero-sum game over political affiliation. Caused a lot of chaos, lots of people died. And one of the ways that people actually managed to survive is by creating a crowdsourcing real-time crisis mapping system. This is called Ushahidi at ushahidi.com. And the way they run it is it's an open source system. So the same platform can be cloned and redeployed on a self-hosting basis. And it's supposed to help people by letting them assign a public data source for something. It could be Twitter, it could be Metaculous, it could be anywhere where people actually submitting a lot of real-time information about something in real time, and then classifying it, and then letting people map where exactly an event is happening so that a response team can react quickly and decide what's important and prioritize what they're doing. So a tool like that is like, feels to me like primary infrastructure, right? Like we don't just need crisis response systems, we need crisis mapping, right? And real-time crisis mapping and accurate real-time crisis mapping. There's several ways to make it happen. And one challenge that can come about from a system like that is how do people verify whether information is correct or not? Whether people are actually talking about things that are relevant to the issue. Like for example, if people are relying on Twitter, people could be relying on a hashtag to decide whether some event is, whether a tweet or something is describing the event and describing the crisis in that event. Problem is you can't always have correct statements, which means you need to train either a classifier or something, you know, that to automatically filter things out. But the problem is, each deployment can be too small to have the right amount of data to classify it, because if it's one event or another, for example, in this case, we're talking about COVID-19. A few weeks into the crisis, not enough people may have been discussing it for it to be relevant to a custom-built classifier, for example. And eventually some data becomes available, and then you have to retrain a model for something like that. Now, one approach that could work in a situation like this is, cool, everyone, you can't just rely on one system, so everyone is allowed to deploy their own version of the system. But how can other systems, that other clones of the system benefit from the same kind of data? So that comes from doing things like unsupervised learning to learn from all of the data without requiring everyone to have access to the same data set and stuff like that. So there's a lot of very interesting research there. But what I wanted to highlight is the idea of a crisis mapping first and then crisis response. You know, in order for people to get on the same page about what's going on the ground.
Yeah, I think like there's like one other valuable aspect of crisis like that, and it's the same aspect that war has. I think Eric Meistein in one podcast said like everything is really, really good about wars, except the awful price, of course. But the idea is that if there is a kind of real world problem, as opposed to like kind of political games or something like that, then there's like an actual need for information that is true. And like it's kind of much, so there is like a sort of almost evolutionary pressure that kind of prioritize information and applications that actually are helpful. And those applications and this information generally is helpful. Like the one that is true, the ones that work tend to be more helpful. And if there's like a people's kind of actual health online and the self-interest in line, then they actually are much less likely to be fooled by bullshit. But it's not obviously not like it's just like a pressure, not like something that we shouldn't keep in mind. There's still a lot of fake information floating.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has a question? Because I'm not sure if everyone is aware of how to use the raise your hand feature. If anyone does not know how to use that, it should be in the bottom of this chat. But if one of you doesn't know how to use it and would like to ask a question, just blurt it out now.
Okay, can I ask my question?
Please.
Okay. You know, first of all, I apologize. I don't know about Metaculus. I'm just learning about it right now. But I'm just going to throw something out there because I worked on a project, beautiful project by Jaan called MetaMed in the past. So in talking about prediction markets, you can predict what will happen. I mean, these incursions into not only our personal lives, but now in the will of society at large, like this event that's happening right now. I think they are far easier to predict because they will happen again and again, and they will happen over and over. But the thing is there a component in the Metaculus platform where you can predict? The most difficult thing to predict is how are we going to react to it? You know, how is humanity going to react, or are we going to go back and regress to even more reactive modes of thinking? Is this a real danger? Or we're going to use this as an opportunity of learning and act and be creative? Is there a component in Metaculus that can predict, okay, this is what happened, this is what humanity did?
Well, I mean, Metaculus is a prediction market. Like the only thing that that is constraining their predictions, other than some ethical concerns, I guess, is like, can this thing be objectively resolved in the future? Like, can you give a date and then like majority of people will agree that yes, this thing happened or this thing did not happen. So like your question, but other than that, you can ask anything. Like you can totally ask, I guess, what is the, I don't know, sort of, if you know that there's like some poll coming up, about like what people think about X. What is the result of that poll? That's very obvious question to ask. Whereas like
well, one thing that was actually on the doc was you could potentially predict if people in the future would have wished they had acted differently, for example, for policy intervention. So, you know, for example, like the Brexit regret or something, you could have predicted that.
Yeah. So that's a kind of like sort of stepping on this like policy territory. Now, obviously, the challenge there is how do you measure that? Like how do you what is the objective criteria that actually can operationalize the question? Like, do people regret doing X?
Maybe something like how many people Google what is Brexit after it occurs or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a matter of operationalizing things.
That's true. I see Dekai with another hand, but is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet who would like to chime in? Okay, Dekai, did you still?
My hand is not up. It just never went down. Sorry.
Okay. All good. All good. All right. Any other suggestions or questions from anyone here?
Allison, hi. I'll jump in.
Yes. Hi.
Hey. So I'm Gaia. I've been supporting Metaculus, doing some advising and consulting since last year, but just in the last few weeks have kind of ramped up in supporting them on this new COVID prediction project. And I just wanted to say hello to the group. If you have specific questions or ideas, we're very open to collaboration. One point I just wanted to address on the last question that was just asked about sort of predicting societal response is that we have, so there's a few categories of questions that the Metaculus is, has over 80 questions already, so related to COVID-19 and in various aspects, including the epidemiological spread and the development of treatments and vaccines, and some of the core sort of scientific progress that's and research that's coming out. But we're also now developing some more questions around the social and economic impact. So would love to get your suggestions for other questions that you're interested in, and would just love to connect with anyone who has specific questions that they're looking for some calibrated group of predictors to forecast on.
Excellent.
And
I'm still muted.
Sorry, just to give you a place to go. You can certainly shoot me a note at Gaia, Gaia @metaculus.com, or find me on LinkedIn, or you can also just write a comment on anywhere on the Metaculus site, and a moderator will respond to you.
Great. I'm really glad you're on it, Gaia. And I'm posting now. I think, okay, in the scheme of things, we're now past 10 a.m. I want to close with the song that Jaan sent me. Before that, I would all encourage you to go to Metaculus. Jaan, is there any other links people should be checking out?
I did not come prepared in that respect, so I will, if something comes to mind, I will post to the chat. Okay.
One thing that I would love for you guys to try is I'm going to post now in this chat window a calendar. Oops. Let's see. Trying to do this not as a private message. Let's see. Okay. Do you know how I can answer to the whole chat rather than, okay. Okay, what?
Yes, you open the chat window, just go to everybody.
There's a pull-down menu. There's an everyone option there.
Everyone. Oh God, thank you guys. I'm definitely still working this out. Okay, I just shared a Google Calendar invite with everyone. Thanks for bearing with me. Can you access that calendar, and would it add the Foresight Sanity Preserver calendar to your calendar?
Yep,
I'm hoping this works. It works? Okay, I'm so glad. All right, well, if you want to do that, I'll be updating this calendar, and you know, I definitely would love to try to keep those events running every day, and as long as my internet connection doesn't fail, and for as many people as we can share it with, I think the more the merrier. I am so happy that so many people from so many different time zones came, and we're still working on syncing all of them, but thank you all for, I mean, you know, people from, like, I really see people almost here from every continent, and that's really, really nice. So thank you all. I think this is really a time for me, at least, for more connection and for trying to push the envelope and for trying to see how we can get more global coordination going, right? Usually Foresight is very Bay Area centered, and I'm so happy that we're being forced to kind of like expand a bit. And I'm really, really thankful to you, Jan, for joining for this experiment. I hope
Thanks
that,
for doing
you know,
this.
I see many, yeah, I hope I see many more of you, you know, tonight and in the coming days. So this is trying to go on twice a day. And yeah, thank you so much. And I'll be closing for now with Jan's favorite song, the one that he sent me here. Yeah. And one of the favorite songs. Yeah, I think it's hard to decide. I'll be closing with that song, and for anyone who afterwards wants to stay on the line, feel free to do that. But here we go. Thank you so much, Jan. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.